Hello everybody, my name's Novi and welcome back to the channel. In the wrestling landscape we live in, discourse dominates the conversation. Whether it's over something small and pointless, which is usually the case, or the rare, large, and meaningful story. Either way, there's always something people are arguing about. And I think if you're on wrestling Twitter for just about 5 minutes, you'll see that. Usually these things only last for a day or two and then people move on. But there are certain things that people argue about that last far longer than they probably ever should. And the best example of that to me is how the AEW doesn't tell stories narrative has existed for 5+ years now. I think most people know whether or not that's really true, and we'll get more into that later. But certain people have stuck so firm to this particular bit of discourse that there's been new branches of discourse that's grown off of it, like it's some tree. And one of those branches is what this video is all about. Whether the story or the wrestling is more important to pro wrestling shows. For some of you, the answer probably seems pretty obvious, just given your own particular view about how wrestling should be done. But today, I want to break the question down on each side, and then at the very end, give my take on it. But before we jump into all that, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We have streams every Wednesday before Dynamite at 7 p.m. EST, as well as new videos just like these every single Saturday, always talking grabs. I think it's best to start by breaking down the AEW doesn't tell stories narrative that I mentioned before. If we're being real, it's kind of crazy that that still gets pushed today, mostly because the company is over 5 years old now, and I kind of would have expected this to develop into something else. However, it definitely hasn't, and judging by how often people still say it, it really does show no signs of slowing down. But even outside of that, the time where I really thought this would kind of wrap itself up was in 2023, the year AEW was most like the WWE in terms of the way they were telling their stories. Of course, you have the big one in Adam Cole and MJF, where from the segments to the skits to the promos to even the matches, one of them featuring a dance-off, don't you forget it, it was pretty much a WWE program down to its core. But even that didn't seem to be good enough, even when for a time, it felt like exactly what the crowd that said they didn't tell stories wanted from AEW, which basically confirmed to me that there was no pleasing this loud minority of fans, which is why I really wish AEW would stop trying to, but we'll leave that video for another Saturday. Really thinking about it though, it was probably naive of me to think that people would stop saying it even for a second, because truthfully, it's the easiest criticism to throw out. It's something you can just kind of say, and then when you get any kind of pushback, you declare, well, that one doesn't count because it sucks, and then just go about your day. Which is funny in its own right, because at that point, all you can do is laugh, but also because there's no way to prove them wrong with that logic in mind. But I know no one should be trying to, because we know they aren't coming at this conversation earnestly and honestly. But say they were, AEW proves that narrative wrong pretty much every week, but specifically with one story. The Toni Storm and Mariah May storyline is absolute perfection to me, and is what AEW should be trying to do all the time. It's gritty, it's brutal, and for the most part, it feels pretty real. And at the end of the day, it's building to a match that's going to be much better served because of this story, which is the way AEW tells their stories to me. They build around the matches themselves. It's like when you see Mariah May giving Toni Storm a crimson mask. You know that that's going to play into their match at All In, which is something I'm preemptively saying because I don't know it, it's still a week out, but it absolutely should. And no matter what anyone tries to say, that way of telling stories is completely valid. But say you were to use this story in particular as pushback to the AEW doesn't tell stories narrative, you're just gonna get shit like this, which is exactly what I said. People basically saying, this one doesn't count. Now I know I'm doing a lot of AEW defending, I get that, but with that, I wanna make one thing very clear. This all isn't to say that AEW is perfect when it comes to their storytelling, not by any means. There are plenty of things for people to criticize, and you can do it all in a fair and meaningful way. For example, I made a whole 18-minute video on the AEW tag division, and the story they're telling within that division going into All In being pretty bad, which, by the way, is a video you can check out after this one, and you probably should. I think it's pretty good. But that's just one current example. There's plenty more out there, like I said. Yet, people just want to say AEW doesn't tell stories and leave it at that. The reason why I'm saying all this, though, is because of how this plays into the question that this video is trying to answer. When it comes to the story versus the wrestling, AEW stories are more about the wrestling a lot of the time. So they're usually associated with that side of the story versus wrestling debate, especially when the other side of the debate, the story, is something a lot of people associate with the WWE. Except a lot of them call it cinema, but you get my point. A great example of the contrast here is that normal AEW fans come in expecting great matches between great wrestlers, while normal WWE fans come in more so expecting great storytelling in their matches. You see the difference in the way the two fan bases reacted to CM Punk versus Drew McIntyre a few weeks ago at SummerSlam. The fan that enjoys AEW more probably came into that match expecting more of a brawl, considering how intense the story they've been telling has been. And maybe they even went in expecting a little bit of blood, if we're being honest. Which really, if we take the whole story into account, would have made a whole lot of sense. But on the other hand, the fan that enjoys the WWE more probably didn't mind that the whole match was built around CM Punk's bracelet. Or even the Seth Rollins guest referee spot, where he would interfere in the match, going so far as to put on the bracelet, and arguing about it right after with Punk, leading to the finish. Honestly though, if we're judging this by the sentiments online, we don't even have to say probably when it comes to a WWE fan's enjoyment, because it seems to me that a lot of the casual WWE audience really enjoyed how story-driven that match was, especially the bracelet stuff. And I'd say that's because it plays to their sensibilities as a fan of the WWE. They don't mind when those moments, like the bracelet stuff, take up huge chunks of a match, because they come into it looking more for the cinema than they do the in-ring action. And it's the same kind of thing with the Liv Morgan, Dominic Mysterio, and Rhea Ripley angle that happened on SummerSlam as well. To me, it was pretty clear that the match between Liv and Rhea wasn't the focus. It was more about which way Dominic would go and which one of them he'd choose. That was obvious to me even before they squared off, and in hindsight, it's even more obvious, seeing how it dominated the conversations going in and now has dominated the conversations coming out. Nobody's really talking about the Liv Rhea match. They're talking about this story, which to me is a great tell, alongside the Drew Punk stuff that happened on the same show, of what kind of wrestling WWE is trying to put out there. An AEW leaning fan probably didn't like that both of those matches were absolutely covered in interference, but the fans WWE has cultivated don't mind at all because it plays to the story, and like I said, that's what they're there for. I'll say this too, just like I said when I was talking about AEW, there's plenty of things to criticize when it comes to WWE's storytelling. It's just that they've cultivated a fan base that wants what they're selling, and that's perfectly fine because those fans definitely want it, no matter how I, you, or anyone else feels about the product. That same thing applies when we're looking at the other side of the coin there too. AEW has cultivated their own kind of fan base that's not so much looking for that kind of storytelling, but is for sure looking for the stories that AEW likes to tell and how they like to tell it. They want to see great matches. They want to look for little things within those matches. They want to see where a given match result takes a character within the broader context of AEW, which is something we see a great example of in the way that AEW booked the Continental Classic. 12 different wrestlers all competing in the same tournament, all with their own unique stories being told within it. Whether it was Swerve going against the absolute best of AEW and winning, proving he belongs in a main event spot. Bryan Danielson battling through injury after injury, all for a chance at glory. Or Daniel Garcia fighting, scratching, and clawing to make a name for himself against the established stars of AEW. Those CC arcs and how each wrestler's tournament played out define those three characters' broader arcs going forward. And it doesn't stop at just those three. This happened with all 9 of the other competitors too. You can go one by one and define what story they were trying to tell in the Continental Classic, and that's what I thought made it so great. If you guys have watched this channel for a while, you all know how I feel about DG's run in this tournament, with it basically being the antithesis of what I want to see more of in AEW. A young wrestler changing and evolving across 5 very different matchups, all culminating in his big win at the very end, giving him all the momentum he would need WWE to establish himself as a main event act going into the new year, and it seemed like the CC was going to be that launching pad that he needed. And while we know that's not necessarily what it ended up being, it doesn't take away from what that tournament accomplished for him. I mentioned before how 2023 was AEW's most WWE-esque year by far. Well, that right there is a reason why so many AEW fans lost interest and only got back into AEW with the Continental Classic, because just how Liv Rhea or Punk Drew was the perfect encapsulation of what WWE fans want from their wrestling, the Continental Classic was what AEW fans want. They don't watch Dynamite to see MJF and Adam Cole go to a trampoline park. They watch it for Hangman losing his mind because he's so obsessed with tearing down Swerve Strickland's success. They watch it because, again, Hangman tells you exactly the mental state he's in just by how he wrestles his matches. More specifically in the one versus Jeff Jarrett in the Owen Hart Cup tournament, where he clearly defined himself as a bad guy who will stop at nothing to get to who he wants. It didn't even need to be a promo, it didn't need to be a segment, it didn't need any of it. All you would have needed to do to know who Hangman was at that point was to watch that match. Like I've said over and over in this video too, both ways of doing things hold merit in their own ways, but the difference between the two is clear and is factored into the answer to the question at the top of the video. Which is more important, the story or the wrestling? Well, the truth is, after all of that, they need each other to truly make something great. You can have a story without a great match. Sure. You can have a match without a great story. Sure. But if you really want to take something in wrestling to that next level, both have to be working in your favor. I want you all to remember back to the match where Wheeler Yuta joined the BCC. It was bloody, violent, and brutal, but it wouldn't have hit as hard if it wasn't for his story with Mox. Bryan Danielson versus Kazuchika Okada at Wrestle Kingdom. A match that, while great on its own, was made infinitely better by what happened in their previous match. And of course, Roman Reigns versus Cody Rhodes, which probably still would have been a great match because those two have unbelievable chemistry, but one that was made infinitely better by the story they had been building over the last few years. There's a million and one examples of this kind of thing across wrestling history, and even looking a whole lot less broadly, just across AEW and WWE in the last year, which is why nowadays I can never respect the idea that it's just one or the other for some people, or that both the story and the wrestling aren't present in every single bit of wrestling we consume. Both AEW and WWE specialize in one of the two here. That's clear. But I can't get down with people pretending that both companies also don't do both pretty much all the time. So at the end of the day, people can prefer one or the other. But when it comes to debating the story or the wrestling, there just isn't a debate. It's always just both. And with that, that's going to do it for the video, everybody. Make sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. And also make sure to stay up to date with what I have going on in the community tab on the channel. I'm constantly posting about what podcasts I'm going to be on, appearances I'm going to make. So if you want to see me talk graps all around YouTube, check it out there. Speaking of which, I'm gonna have an appearance with the Late Night Grin this coming Friday to preview All In. We'll give our predictions, we'll do the famous temperature check, we're gonna get into all of it. So make sure to come by then, it's always a great time over there. But for now, thank you all for watching this video. It's been Novi, much love to you all, peace.